For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council has maintained perfect order across 17 star systems. Wars are forbidden. Conflicts are resolved through careful negotiation. Violence is a relic of primitive civilizations. But now, something is coming for Earth. Something the Council cannot negotiate with, cannot reason with, cannot stop. And for the first time in millennia, the galaxy's greatest diplomatic minds are reduced to helpless observers, watching as humanity prepares to face an enemy that has consumed entire worlds. The irony is not lost on them. The very species they once dismissed as barbaric might be the only thing standing between civilization and complete annihilation. Some things, it seems, can only be answered with the kind of primal fury that the galaxy thought it had evolved beyond. Humanity is about to remind them why evolution kept that fury alive. The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council headquarters trembled as Ambassador HFY received the transmission. Her four arms moved frantically across the holographic interface, trying to process what her senses were telling her. The data couldn't be right. It had to be some kind of malfunction. "Emergency session," she called out, her voice carrying the harmonic frequencies that indicated extreme distress in her species. Within moments, the great chamber began to fill with representatives from across known space. The hegemony's insectoid delegates clicked their mandibles nervously. The ethereal voidlings materialized in shimmering clouds of consciousness. Even the ancient architects, being so old they remembered when stars were young, abandoned their contemplative silence to attend. HFY's hands shook as she activated the central display. The hologram showed a sector of space that should have contained the thriving Kepler colony. 7 billion souls spread across 12 worlds, a testament to the peaceful expansion that the Council had fostered for millennia. Instead, the display showed empty space. Not destroyed worlds, not asteroid fields, nothing. As if 12 planets had simply ceased to exist. "The Devourers have returned," she announced, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. Elder Cothran of the Architects leaned forward, his ancient frame crackling with barely contained energy. "That is impossible. We sealed them away eons before your species drew breath. The barriers were designed to last until the heat death of the universe. Yet here we are," HFY replied, pulling up additional data streams. "Long-range sensors detect their signature across 17 systems now. They're not just breaking free, they're spreading faster than ever before. And their trajectory," she paused, checking the calculations one more time. "They're heading directly for Sol System." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Sol System, the home of humanity, the newest and arguably most problematic member species of the Council. Humans had been granted membership only 50 years ago, and even then, it had been controversial. They were violent, unpredictable, and possessed an alarming tendency to solve problems through force rather than diplomacy. "Perhaps," suggested Councillor Vextar of the Hegemony, his compound eyes gleaming, "this is an opportunity. The humans have always been a destabilizing influence. If the Devourers consume them, we lose only our most troublesome member." The chamber erupted in heated debate. Some agreed with Vextar's cold logic. Others argued for evacuation protocols. But Elder Cothran remained silent, his ancient mind working through possibilities that younger species couldn't comprehend. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The Devourers don't simply consume matter and energy. They consume possibility itself. Every world they touch becomes a wound in reality, a place where nothing can ever exist again. If they establish a foothold in Sol System, their corruption will spread. Within a generation, the entire galaxy will be unmade." The debate ceased immediately. The Devourers weren't just extinction, they were the antithesis of existence itself. "Then we must evacuate the humans immediately," declared Ambassador This of the Voidlings, her consciousness flickering with urgency. "Our fastest ships can reach Earth within 6 rotations. We can save perhaps 1 million of them before the Devourers arrive." 1 million out of 8 billion, HFY said grimly. "And where would we take them? Every refugee ship becomes a target. The Devourers follow life essence. We'd simply be leaving them to our own worlds." Elder Cothran stood slowly, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. "There is another consideration, one that none of you have thought of." He activated his personal display, showing archived footage from the last Devourer incursion, 12,000 years ago. The recording showed entire fleets of council ships being consumed, their crews screaming as their very souls were torn apart. Every species they faced, the Crystalline Empire, the First Federation, the Union of Thought, All used the same strategy. Evacuation, retreat, defensive containment. All failed. He paused, letting the implications sink in. But there is one strategy that was never tried.
What strategy? Sci-Fi asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer.
Direct assault, aggressive retaliation, fighting back with such overwhelming violence that even the Devourers would be forced to retreat. The chamber fell silent again. The concept was so alien to modern galactic civilization that many delegates couldn't even process it. War was extinct. Violence was primitive. The idea of deliberately seeking out and attacking an enemy was antithetical to everything the Council stood for. The humans. Vextar said slowly, understanding dawning in his multifaceted gaze. You want to use the humans? The humans don't need to be used, Elder Kothran replied. They simply need to be informed. Their nature will handle the rest. Ambassador Fisk materialized more solidly, her consciousness coalescing around the concept. This is madness. Humans are violent, yes, but they're primitives. Their weapons are crude chemical propulsion and nuclear fission. What could they possibly do against beings that consumed the Stellar Empire? Elder Kothran's response chilled the chamber. The Stellar Empire fought with logic, strategy, and overwhelming technological superiority. They fought to minimize casualties and preserve infrastructure. They fought like civilized beings. He paused, accessing memories older than recorded history. The humans fight like their ancestors fought when survival was uncertain and death was always one mistake away. They fight like beings who remember that sometimes the only way to preserve what you love is to destroy what threatens it. The debate that followed lasted for 3 rotations. Some argued for traditional evacuation protocols. Others suggested attempting to redirect the Devourers towards uninhabited systems. A few even proposed surrendering entire sectors as buffer zones. But Elder Kothran's words had planted a seed of possibility that grew with each failed alternative. Finally, Zeph called for a formal vote. The resolution was narrow, barely achieving the required consensus, but it passed. The Galactic Council would do something unprecedented in its 12,000-year history. It would do nothing. No evacuation, no intervention, no assistance of any kind. Humanity would face the Devourers alone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, with their reality-shaping technologies and consciousness-transcending abilities, were gambling everything on the most primitive species in known space. As the delegates dispersed, Elder Kothran remained in the chamber, staring at the tactical display showing the Devourers' inexorable advance towards Sol System. His aide, a young architect named Urelden, approached hesitantly.
Elder, forgive my presumption, but how can you be certain the humans will fight?
They might simply surrender or flee like any rational species would. Elder Kothran's laugh was like the sound of stars being born. Young one, you clearly haven't studied human history closely enough. They have a saying, the only good fight is the one you walk away from. But they have another saying that reveals their true nature. Some things are worth dying for. He pulled up data files on human conflicts, thousands of years of warfare, from stone clubs to stellar cruisers. Look at their patterns. When faced with impossible odds, when logic dictates surrender, when every strategic analysis says defeat is certain, they do something that no other species has ever done consistently. What's that, Elder? They attack. Meanwhile, light years away, the first Devourer scouts were already probing the outer edges of Sol System. They found what they expected, a primitive civilization with crude defenses and limited technology. The main force would arrive within days, and another world would join the growing void in space where reality itself had been consumed. But as the scouts analyzed Earth's defensive capabilities, they detected something unusual. The humans weren't evacuating. They weren't hiding. Instead, every ship, every weapon, every resource on the planet was being mobilized and pointed outward toward the approaching threat. The scouts reported this anomaly to the main swarm, which processed the information with mild curiosity. In 12,000 years of existence, they'd consumed billions of worlds. They'd faced every type of defense imaginable. But never had they encountered a species that responded to certain annihilation by preparing for war. The Devourers didn't understand fear because they had never experienced it. They were about to learn. On Earth, President Chen stood before the United Nations Emergency Assembly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was announcing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have received confirmation from our deep space monitors. Something is coming. Something that has already destroyed 7 star systems and is heading directly for us. The chamber erupted in chaos, but Chen continued speaking, her words cutting through the panic. The Galactic Council has informed us that these entities, they call them devourers, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and cannot be stopped by conventional means. They have offered to evacuate a small percentage of our population, but they've made it clear that they consider our world lost. She paused, letting the full weight of the situation settle on the assembly. I want to be absolutely clear about our options. We can attempt evacuation, knowing that 99% of humanity will die. We can surrender and hope for mercy from beings that have never shown any. Or what? Demanded the representative from the European Federation. President Chen's smile was sharp as a blade. Or we remind the galaxy why evolution gave us the capacity for righteous anger. The vote was unanimous. Not a single dissenting voice. Not one call for surrender or evacuation. 8 billion humans had just voted to fight beings that had consumed entire civilizations. As the session ended and preparations began, President Chen received a private communication from Elder Kothran. The ancient being's message was simple. The galaxy watches with great interest to see what humans do when faced with the impossible. Her reply was even simpler. They're about to find out. Across Earth, the mobilization began. Not just of military forces, but of everything humanity had ever built, learned, or dreamed of. Scientists worked frantically to weaponize technologies that had been designed for peace. Engineers retrofitted civilian ships with armor and weapons. Factories that had produced consumer goods retooled overnight to manufacture instruments of war. But perhaps most importantly, something else was mobilizing. Something that couldn't be measured in ships or weapons or technology. For the first time in their history, every human on Earth was united by a single purpose: the absolute destruction of anything that dared threaten their home. The Devourers had consumed civilizations that spanned galaxies. They had unmade beings that existed as pure thought. They had erased realities that mortals couldn't even comprehend. But they had never faced a species that considered their own extinction preferable to yielding even an inch of ground to an invader. They were about to discover that some fires, once lit, cannot be extinguished. They can only burn brighter until everything around them is consumed by light. The darkness between stars shuddered as the Devourer vanguard emerged from the spaces between dimensions. Their forms defied description, not because they were complex, but because they actively resisted existence itself. Where they passed, space became a little less real. Matter became a little less solid. And the fundamental forces that held reality together became a little weaker. Admiral Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's newest and most powerful warship, watching the sensors paint impossible readings across her tactical display. The ship had been completed just 6 months ago, incorporating every lesson learned from 50 years of contact with galactic civilization. It was humanity's answer to the sleek, efficient vessels of the Council races, a bristling mountain of armor, weapons, and barely controlled nuclear fury. "Ma'am," called her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Singh, "we're reading massive gravitational distortions at the edge of the system. Whatever's coming, it's big." "How big?" Martinez asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "The lead construct is roughly the size of Manhattan. The ones behind it," Singh paused, double-checking his readings. "Admiral, we're detecting at least 50 more, each one larger than the last. And there's something else. The space around them. It's not reading as normal space anymore." Martinez nodded grimly. The Council's briefing had mentioned this. The Devourers didn't just consume matter and energy. They consumed the very possibility of existence. Every world they touched became a wound in reality, a place where nothing could ever be again. "Communications, patch me through to all ships," she ordered. "This is Admiral Martinez to all vessels. You've all seen the briefings. You know what we're facing. In approximately 6 hours, beings that have destroyed entire civilizations will enter our solar system with the intent of consuming every trace of human existence." She paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. 300 ships of every class and configuration, from massive dreadnoughts to nimble destroyers, to converted civilian vessels crammed with whatever weapons their crews could manage. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it was utterly insignificant compared to the fleets that had failed to stop the Devourers before.
"I won't lie to you," Martinez continued.
"According to every projection, every simulation, every bit of data the Council has provided, we cannot win. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and facing an enemy that exists partially outside of normal reality. By all rational calculations, we should evacuate what population we can, and accept that Earth is lost. The communication channel remained silent. Every captain, every crew member was listening. But there's something the Council doesn't understand about humans. Something they've never quite grasped in all their years of studying us. Martinez's voice hardened. We don't fight to win. We fight because some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. We fight because backing down is worse than dying. We fight because our children are behind us, and they're counting on us to hold the line. A new voice cut across the channel. Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Indomitable. Admiral, my grandmother used to tell me stories about the old wars on Earth. She said the worst thing about giving up wasn't the dying, it was having to live with yourself afterward. Mine too, added Captain Kim from the carrier Righteous Fury. She also said that sometimes, when your back's against the wall and there's nowhere left to run, you discover what you're really made of. One by one, other voices joined in. Not speeches or grand declarations, but simple acknowledgements of what they all knew. They were probably going to die, and that was acceptable as long as they died fighting. Martinez felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with military rank or national loyalty. This was something deeper. Species recognition. These were her people, and they were about to remind the galaxy what 8 billion years of evolution had produced when survival was never guaranteed. All ships, assume attack formation Gamma. We're going to meet them at the edge of the system. If they want Earth, they'll have to go through us first. The human fleet accelerated toward the outer system, their engines burning with an intensity that would have seemed reckless to any Council observer. They weren't conserving fuel or maintaining formation discipline. They were charging directly at an enemy that had consumed civilization spanning multiple galaxies. Aboard the Galactic Council monitoring station hidden in the asteroid belt, Ambassador Zeph High watched the human fleet's advance with growing amazement. They're not even attempting defensive positions. They're attacking immediately. Of course they are, Elder Kothran replied, his ancient voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history as persistence predators. When they encounter a threat, their first instinct isn't to hide or analyze, it's to chase it down and kill it. The Devourer Vanguard detected the approaching human ships and responded with what passed for curiosity among their kind. These beings were so primitive that their vessels still relied on chemical propulsion and crude nuclear reactions. Their weapons were barely more advanced than the clubs their ancestors had used to hunt animals. The lead Devourer construct, a writhing mass of impossible angles and screaming darkness, extended sensory tendrils toward the human fleet. What it found confused it. The ships registered as insignificant threats barely worth noticing. But the life forms inside them, the construct had consumed billions of sentient beings across thousands of worlds. It knew the taste of fear, despair, and resignation. It knew how civilized minds processed the inevitability of defeat. But these creatures, these humans, tasted different. Where there should have been terror, there was rage. Where there should have been despair, there was determination. Where there should have been acceptance of death, there was an absolute refusal to yield. For the first time in its existence, the construct experienced something it had no name for. Uncertainty. The human fleet entered weapons range, and Admiral Martinez gave the order that would define humanity's place in galactic history. All ships fire at will.
What followed was less a battle than a controlled explosion.
Every weapon in the human arsenal opened fire simultaneously. Nuclear missiles, particle beams, kinetic projectiles, experimental plasma cannons, and weapons so new they didn't even have names yet. The combined firepower was equivalent to several stellar detonations compressed into a few cubic kilometers of space. The Devourer Vanguard, expecting minimal resistance, found itself caught in a firestorm that would have reduced a normal planet to constituent atoms. Their reality-warping abilities, designed to consume matter and energy gradually, struggled to process the sheer volume of destruction being hurled at them. Direct hit on the lead construct, Singh reported, his voice amazed. It's actually damaged. Martinez studied the tactical display. The massive Devourer ship was wounded. Sections of its impossible geometry were collapsing, and the space around it had stopped warping. But it was regenerating, pulling matter and energy from somewhere else to repair itself. All ships concentrate fire on the damaged construct. Keep hitting it before it can heal. The human fleet swarmed the wounded Devourer like antibodies attacking an infection. Their coordinated assault was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not because of superior technology or brilliant tactics, but because of the sheer, unrelenting savagery of it. They didn't stop firing when their initial salvo proved effective. They didn't pause to assess damage or consider alternatives. They simply kept shooting until their target stopped moving. The first Devourer construct died in a cascade of collapsing reality, its essence scattered across dimensions it could no longer access. The remaining constructs, processing this unprecedented event, began to adapt their strategy. But adaptation took time, and time was something the humans weren't willing to give them. Second target acquired, Martinez announced. Same tactics, concentrated fire until it's dead. The human fleet pivoted as one and launched another devastating assault. Their weapons were crude by galactic standards, but they were being wielded by beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing things that were bigger and stronger than they were. Aboard the Council monitoring station, the assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as humanity systematically engaged and destroyed Devourer constructs that should have been invulnerable. How are they doing this? Council of Extar demanded. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their weapons shouldn't even be able to touch Devourer constructs. Elder Cothran studied the tactical display with growing understanding. They're not relying on technology. Look at their pattern of attack. They're not trying to match the Devourer's reality manipulation abilities. They're simply overwhelming them with raw, persistent violence. But that should be impossible. The constructs can absorb and redirect any form of energy attack. Yes, the Elder agreed. But they're designed to absorb attacks from civilized species. Measured, efficient applications of force. The humans aren't being efficient. They're being excessive. They're throwing so much destruction at each target that the constructs can't process it all fast enough. Ambassador Thys materialized beside them, her consciousness flickering with disbelief. You're saying they're winning through sheer barbarism? I'm saying they're winning because they never forgot that sometimes the only answer to a monster is a bigger monster. The battle raged for 17 hours. Human ships were lost, vaporized by reality distortions, consumed by dimensional rifts, or simply overwhelmed by the Devourer's alien weapons. But for every ship they lost, they destroyed another construct. And with each victory, their tactics became more refined, more vicious, more effective. Admiral Martinez, her ship bloodied but still fighting, watched as the last of the Vanguard constructs collapsed into fading geometry. Her fleet was reduced to less than half its original strength. But they had accomplished something that 12,000 years of galactic civilization had declared impossible. They had fought the Devourers and won. Admiral, Singh called out. We're detecting massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. The main force is arriving. Martinez looked at the sensor readings and felt her stomach drop. Where the Vanguard had consisted of 50 constructs, the main force numbered in the thousands. Vast shapes that dwarfed entire moons, surrounded by smaller escorts that were individually larger than anything in the human fleet. Communications, open a channel to Earth Command, she ordered. This is Admiral Martinez to President Chen. We've successfully engaged the advance force and eliminated all targets. However, the main force is, she paused, searching for the right words. Man, there are too many of them. We can't stop them all. President Chen's response came back immediately. Admiral, what are your losses? 47% of the fleet, ma'am. And enemy losses? 100% of the advance force, ma'am. Complete destruction. There was a long pause. Then Chen's voice returned, carrying a tone that Martinez had never heard before. Not pride or satisfaction, but something deeper and more primal. Admiral, you and your people have just proven something that the galaxy thought was impossible. You've shown that the Devourers can be hurt, can be killed, can be stopped. Yes, ma'am, but the main force will find a planet that's been given 17 hours to prepare. 17 hours to understand that these things can die. 17 hours to get really, really angry about the fact that they've come to our home uninvited. Martinez looked out at her battered fleet and felt something she had no name for, a fierce joy that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with the knowledge that they had given humanity what it needed most, proof that the enemy could bleed. All remaining ships, fall back to Earth orbit, she ordered. We're going to rejoin the Planetary Defense Force and show these things what happens when you threaten 8 billion humans who are done being reasonable. As the human fleet withdrew toward Earth, the main Devourer force entered the outer system. Their massive constructs moved with the confidence of beings that had consumed entire galaxies without resistance. They had absorbed the experiences of their vanguard, analyzed the human tactics, and adapted their strategies accordingly. They were prepared for anything the primitive species might throw at them. What they weren't prepared for was the sight of Earth itself, blazing like a nova with the combined energy output of every power source, every reactor, every generator on the planet focused into a weapon system that had been built with one purpose, making the approaching invaders regret their existence. The galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented, Not just the fury of a single species fighting for survival, but the concentrated rage of an entire world that had decided the price of peace was too high. Earth had become a fortress. In the 17 hours since Admiral Martinez's fleet had bought them time with their blood and sacrifice, 8 billion humans had transformed their homeworld into something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. The planet's surface bristled with weapons that had never been designed, power sources that violated conservation of energy, and defensive systems built from technologies that the galaxy's greatest minds had declared impossible. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the hastily constructed command center buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps, surrounded by screens showing impossible readings. As humanity's leading expert on exotic physics, she had been tasked with weaponizing every piece of alien technology Earth had acquired in 50 years of galactic membership. "Status report," demanded General Harrison, the man now responsible for coordinating Earth's defense. "The planetary mass driver is online," Vasquez replied, gesturing to a display that showed massive magnetic accelerators built into the planet's crust. "We've turned Earth into a railgun capable of launching projectiles at 15% light speed."
The fusion grid?
"Every nuclear reactor on Earth is networked and synchronized. When we fire the main weapon, we'll be channeling the equivalent of a star's output through crystalline focus arrays we reverse-engineered from Council technology." General Harrison nodded grimly. "And the kinetic barriers?"
Gravity manipulators at the Lagrange points will create
"Spatial distortions around the planet. Anything traveling faster than orbital velocity gets redirected into the sun." She paused, double-checking her calculations. "Sir, I need to be clear about something. What we've built isn't a defensive system. It's a trap. Once we activate everything, there's no shutting it down. Earth becomes a weapon pointed at anything in the solar system, including ourselves. Including ourselves. The power requirements alone will render most of the planet uninhabitable. We're essentially turning our homeworld into a bomb." Harrison studied the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Thousands of constructs, each one the size of a small moon, moving through space like a plague of impossible geometry. "Dr. Vasquez, in your professional opinion, what are our chances of survival?" She looked at him with the clear, steady gaze of someone who had already accepted the inevitable. "Zero, sir. But our chances of taking them with us? Those are looking pretty good." High above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral Martinez's surviving fleet took position around the planet's orbital defense platforms. Her force had been reduced to 93 ships, but each one was crewed by humans who had looked death in the face and decided they weren't impressed. "Admiral!" called Captain Torres from the heavy cruiser Unconquered. "We're detecting movement in the outer system. The Devourers are accelerating toward Earth." Martinez studied the incoming formations. The aliens had learned from their encounter with the human vanguard. Instead of the scattered approach their advance force had used, the main fleet was moving in tight formations designed to concentrate their reality-warping abilities. They were adapting, evolving their tactics. "All ships, implement Protocol Omega," she ordered. Protocol Omega was humanity's answer to superior technology and impossible odds. Pure, undiluted aggression. Every human ship would be linked into a single targeting network, their weapons synchronized to deliver maximum damage at the precise moment the enemy entered range. There would be no retreat, no tactical withdrawal, no clever maneuvering. Just 8 billion humans worth of fury concentrated into whatever time they had left. Aboard the Galactic Council monitoring station, the assembled delegates watched the approaching confrontation with a mixture of fascination and horror. The humans weren't just preparing to fight, they were preparing to die in the most destructive way possible. "They're going to get themselves killed," Ambassador This said, her consciousness flickering with distress. "All of them." "Yes," Elder Cothran agreed. "But look how they're choosing to die." The tactical display showed Earth surrounded by weapon signatures that shouldn't have been possible. The humans had somehow turned their entire planet into a weapon system, networked their surviving fleet into a single-strike platform, and configured everything to fire simultaneously at maximum power. "They're not trying to survive," Council of Extra observed. "They're trying to make their deaths count." "More than that," the Elder replied. "They're trying to send a message to anything else that might threaten their species. They're saying that the price of attacking humanity is so high that even victory becomes meaningless." The Devourer main fleet entered the outer solar system, their massive constructs blotting out stars as they passed. The lead entities, beings that had consumed entire galactic civilizations, extended their senses toward the small blue world that awaited them. What they found was unprecedented in their eons of existence. The planet wasn't cowering. It wasn't trying to hide or evacuate its population. Instead, Every human on Earth was actively participating in turning their world into a weapon pointed directly at the approaching fleet. 8 billion sentient beings had decided that if they were going to die, they were going to take their killers with them. For entities that existed partially outside normal space-time, the Devourer's equivalent of surprise was a brief fluctuation in their reality distortion fields. They had consumed civilizations that spanned galaxies, absorbed beings that existed as pure thought, unmade realities that transcended physical existence, but they had never encountered a species that responded to certain extinction with such concentrated malevolence. The lead construct sent out communication pulses, not words or concepts, but direct transfers of intent. It offered the humans the same choice it had offered every other species: submit and be absorbed peacefully, or resist and be consumed in agony. Earth's response came not in words, but in action. Every weapon on the planet fired simultaneously. The planetary mass driver hurled projectiles massing several tons each at 15% light speed. The fusion grid channeled stellar-level energy through crystalline focus arrays, creating coherent beams that could cut through neutronium. The orbital defense platforms opened fire with every weapon humanity had ever conceived, while the surviving fleet launched everything they had, in a coordinated strike that lit up the solar system like a second sun. The first wave of Devourer constructs simply ceased to exist. The sheer volume of destruction overwhelmed their ability to absorb and redirect energy. Reality warping fields collapsed under the pressure of weapons that operated on principles the aliens couldn't comprehend, not because they were advanced, but because they were powered by something beyond technology. Impossible, breathed Ambassador Zefgahe, watching the tactical display show Devourer constructs being systematically destroyed. They're actually winning. No, Elder Kothran corrected. They're not trying to win. They're trying to make sure that whatever survives this battle remembers that humanity existed. The battle became a meat grinder of impossible proportions. Human weapons poured destruction into the Devourer fleet with a sustained intensity that violated several laws of physics. Every time a construct fell, Earth's weapon systems automatically targeted the next one, maintaining a rate of fire that should have been impossible for their power sources to sustain. But the Devourers were learning. The surviving constructs began coordinating their reality manipulation abilities, creating zones where human weapons simply stopped working. They adapted their approach, using their fallen comrades as shields while they advanced on the planet. Admiral Martinez watched her fleet being systematically torn apart by alien weapons that turned their ships inside out or simply erased them from existence. But for every ship she lost, another section of the Devourer fleet died screaming. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Singh from his position at the tactical station. "We're down to 37 ships. Ammunition reserves at critical levels." Martinez looked at the tactical display. The Devourers had lost over 60% of their fleet, but the survivors were adapting faster than humanity could adjust their tactics. The aliens would reach Earth within hours. "Signal all remaining ships," she ordered. "Ramming speed."
If we're out of bullets, we'll use the ships themselves.
What followed defied every principle of naval warfare in galactic history.
Human vessels, their crews singing battle songs that echoed across communication channels, accelerated directly into Devourer constructs at maximum speed. The impacts were like small stars dying, explosions of matter and energy that consumed everything within thousands of kilometers. On Earth, Dr. Vasquez watched the power readings spike beyond theoretical maximums as the planet's weapons systems operated at levels that should have caused immediate catastrophic failure. "Sir, the fusion grid is running at 200% capacity. We're minutes away from complete system overload. How many Devourers are left?" General Harrison asked. 17 constructs, sir. But they're the largest ones, the command entities that control the others. Harrison nodded grimly. 17 world-killing monsters against a planet that had already expended most of its ammunition and was running on weapon systems held together by fury and determination. "Dr. Vasquez, what happens if we overload the fusion grid deliberately?" She stared at him in horror. "Sir, that would turn Earth into a miniature supernova. The explosion would be visible from neighboring star systems. Would it take the remaining Devourers with us?" Vasquez ran quick calculations, her fingers flying over holographic displays. "Yes, sir. The energy release would exceed their ability to absorb or redirect. But it would also sterilize the solar system." "I understand." Harrison activated his communication system, patching through to President Chen in the deep bunker beneath Geneva. Madam President, I am requesting authorization for Protocol Zero. There was a long pause. Protocol Zero was humanity's final option, the complete destruction of Earth itself, to deny it to any enemy. It had been designed as a last resort against alien invasion, but no one had ever imagined they would actually use it. General, Chen's voice came back steady and clear. How many of them are left? 17 men. The big ones. And our current ammunition reserves? Effectively zero, ma'am. We fired everything we have. Another pause. Then, General, in your military opinion, can those 17 constructs still consume our world?
Yes, ma'am.
Easily. Then we have our answer. Authorization granted for Protocol Zero. Let's show the galaxy what humans do when someone tries to take their home. Quote. Vasquez initiated the overload sequence with hands that shook slightly, not from fear but from the magnitude of what she was doing. Across the planet, fusion reactors began operating beyond safe parameters, their energy output channeled through systems that were never designed to handle such loads. All personnel, this is General Harrison. Protocol Zero is now in effect. You have 15 minutes to record final messages for transmission to the galactic community. Make them count. Across Earth, 8 billion humans use those 15 minutes to say goodbye, not with tears or despair, but with words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Messages of love for their families, defiance toward their enemies, and a final declaration that humanity had chosen to die free rather than live in chains. In the deep command bunker, President Chen recorded her own message, to be transmitted to the Galactic Council. To our friends among the stars, we thank you for accepting us as equals, even when we didn't always act like it. To our enemies, remember that when you came for our world, we turned it into your funeral pyre. To anyone listening in the future, this is what humanity looks like when pushed too far. We hope you never have to follow our example. The 17 surviving Devourer constructs detected the massive energy buildup as Earth's fusion grid approached critical overload. For the first time in their existence, they experienced something approaching panic. The planet was turning itself into a weapon that could destroy everything within several light minutes. They tried to retreat, but it was too late. The overload sequence had passed the point of no return. Earth died like a star being born, its death scream visible across half the galaxy. The explosion consumed the remaining Devourer fleet, the solar system, and everything within 3 light years. Where humanity's homeworld had once orbited, there was now only an expanding sphere of plasma and radiation that would glow for millennia. But the death of Earth accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. The message it sent was received not just by the Galactic Council, but by the vast network of Devourer consciousness that existed between dimensions. For the first time since they began consuming realities, the Devourers understood that some species would make the cost of victory higher than the value of conquest. The invasion stopped. Not just of human space, but everywhere. The Devourers retreated to the spaces between worlds, content to wait for easier prey. They had learned that some fires once lit could burn bright enough to hurt even beings that existed beyond normal reality. In the Galactic Council chamber, Elder Cothran stood before the memorial display that now marked where Sol System had been. Around him, delegates from across known space maintained a moment of silence for the species that had saved them all through the simple act of refusing to surrender. They're gone, Ambassador Thys said softly. All of them? No, the Elder replied. They're not gone. They're everywhere. In the space between stars where the Devourers fear to tread. In the message that's traveling to every corner of the galaxy, telling everyone who hears it that extinction is not the worst fate that can befall a species. He activated the display, showing the final transmission from Earth. 8 billion voices raised in defiant song as their world burned around them, choosing to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. The humans gave us the greatest gift one species can give another, Elder Cothran continued. They reminded us that some things are worth any price to preserve. Freedom, dignity, the right to exist without fear. Councillor Vexstar stepped forward, his compound eyes reflecting the memorial flames. What do we tell the young ones who ask why the humans chose to die? Elder Cothran's answer echoed through the chamber and across the galaxy. We tell them that when monsters came for Earth, humanity looked them in the eye and said no. And when the monsters asked what they were willing to pay to make that no stick, humanity answered everything. The Galactic Council's official records would show that the Devourer incursion was stopped through the sacrifice of a minor member species. But the real story, the one told in whispered conversations across 10,000 worlds, was simpler and more profound. When the universe itself came to devour humanity, 8 billion humans stood up and said, "Try it." And the universe blinked first. In the years that followed, as the galaxy rebuilt and remembered, children of every species would learn about the small blue world that chose to burn rather than bow. They would learn about Admiral Martinez, who led humanity's first victory against impossible odds. They would learn about President Chen, who chose extinction over submission. They would learn about Dr. Vasquez, who turned a planet into a weapon. And they would learn about 8 billion ordinary people who, faced with certain death, chose to make that death mean something. The lesson would echo through history. Some lights burn so bright that even when they're extinguished, their glow continues to push back the darkness for generations to come. Humanity's light had lasted only 50 years in the galactic community, but its brilliance would illuminate the path forward for as long as civilization endured. The Devourers never returned. Somewhere in the spaces between realities, they remembered a small species that had taught them the meaning of a word they thought they understood. No. And across the galaxy, whenever young civilizations encountered threats that seemed insurmountable, they would remember Earth's example and ask themselves a simple question. What would the humans do? The answer, invariably, was the same. They would fight. They would rage against the dying of the light. They would stand up to monsters and bullies and gods themselves, armed with nothing but the absolute certainty that some things are worth defending at any cost. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not their technology or their knowledge or their art, but their unshakable conviction that freedom is worth any price, and that the only response to tyranny is defiance that burns brighter than stars. The galaxy learned to carry that fire within themselves, and it made them stronger. It made them human in all the ways that mattered.